We have been blessed by creation and community. The injustice of extractive relationships and systemic racism have fractured both. Let's Talk Rev is all about providing tools and access for communities to build power from the grassroots up for change at the policy level. Our guests are doing this in various ways. Sit back and enjoy this casual, spirited conversation with Rev. Welcome to Let's Talk with Rev. Today we have with us our co-host for this season, Miss Erniko, and we've also got our guest, Miss Danna Smith, today with us. And we want to talk about all things biomass. We want to also talk about the Southern Communities Green New Deal, which we're excited that we were a part of and helped to bring to fruition. So we'd love to talk about both and in this conversation. But before I get started, and before we get started in the conversation, I'll let Ms. Erniko introduce herself. And then Danna, if you would just introduce yourself in your own way.
Hey everybody, it is definitely a pleasure being here today with you all. I am so excited to dig into this conversation with my executive director of the lovely place that I work, getting her perspective on what's going on and just having a deep conversation and taking a deep dive into what's going on in the Southeast, all right? Ms. Danna?
All right. Well, it's an honor to be here with two of my faves, Reverend Michael Malcolm and Erniko. So I'm Danna. I'm the executive director at Dogwood Alliance, and our organization is focused on advancing environmental justice and climate action through mobilizing diverse voices to protect the forests and communities of the southern U.S. from destructive industrial logging practices.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Danna, how long have you been doing this work? How long have you been, first, how long have you been an environmentalist and a lover of the trees? And then how long have you been doing this particular type of work and looking at environmental justice?
Well, I have been a lover of nature since I was a child. And that includes a lover of people, because people and nature are not separate. That's a myth that has been perpetuated for too long. And so when I say I'm a nature lover, that means I love people too. And I grew up in the southern coastal plain of South Carolina, and love the culture, love the people, love the nature, and love the forest. So that's a lifetime. I've been doing this environmental work pretty much since I got out of law school in 1991. But I did a lot of volunteer work for a while and then ended up starting the Dogwood Alliance in 1996 because there was a recognition that there was just so much industrial logging going on. And at the time, the paper industry was making a big expansion across the region. And there were communities all across the South who were really concerned about the impacts of that. So Dogwood Alliance was born out of a grassroots effort, out of community-based concerns about the impacts of logging in southeastern forests. And I would say our orientation towards doing environmental justice work really started about 10 years ago when the wood pellet industry started to expand across the South. And we started to see this pattern of these wood pellet mills going into communities of color and low income communities across the rural South. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got another question concerning your origin story in the environmental justice community, because we share the same origin story or there somewhat thereof, and we definitely share the same mentor. And so I can't help but to invoke Reverend Leo Woodbury. But let's talk about justice first and that whole experiencing and seeing. I tell you, one of the biggest visits that we have that impacted me most was seeing the wetlands in Louisiana. And us standing there and seeing just how beautiful that was in the middle of Ninth Ward, and being able to have conversations around their resiliency and protecting those wetlands. And I mean, I could just sit back and try to paint this picture, but I'd be dominating the conversation and wouldn't be a good host if I did that. And so I'd love for you to just paint the picture. And Erniko, I know you weren't there, but if she can paint the picture and I can climb on top of it, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to see it. And I'd love to hear how you feel about what you've experienced as well in your community and in your upbringing, and how it's impacted you in this work. So Danna, if you would just take me back to Louisiana.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, that tour was just incredible and I learned so much. And thank you for invoking the spirit of our dear friend, Reverend Leo Woodbury. He definitely has had a huge impact on my thinking and my way of being in the space of working to protect forests. And the Justice First tour, which we did, which was of course a tour across the entire southeastern region. I think we did 13 states and 25 cities.
Yes,
and one of those was New Orleans. And that is actually, Michael, one of the places that I too felt such a profound impact. I was really impacted by that tour that we did and the visit with the local community there. So just for context, I was first of all just sort of, eyes open about how climate change and Katrina had disproportionately impacted that community because of the failure of the government to maintain the levee. And, some years, what was it, 13 years later, we were standing there and the community was still struggling to rebuild. There was still, you could see places where the community had been rebuilt, but you could also see empty lots and buildings that had, nothing in them. So it was really this juxtaposition of, a community that was still struggling to get the resources that it needed while other communities throughout the city in wealthier neighborhoods had already been rebuilt. So that was a big, lesson for me on the ground. You hear about these things, but to see it in real time was really profound. And when they took us to that little area of the wetland where the community had actually, in the midst of all this devastation, and in the midst of trying to literally rebuild their community, had prioritized building a place where they could access this wetland forested area next to the river, because to them it meant so much in terms of their peace, their resilience, their recreation, their livelihood. Even they talked about fishing in there and getting food out of the river. And how they had to, on their own, this community had to put in the infrastructure to be able to access that wetland forest again after the storm. And it wasn't until the community had actually done the work that the state came in behind it, or the federal government, I can't remember what it was, came in behind it and gave them some additional resources to put up a plaque and, to put a little boardwalk or something. But to me, it just really resonated so much to recognize just how much that slice of nature, that those wetland forests meant to that community.
Erniko, listening at that and just reliving the Justice First tour and especially that moment and seeing how resilient the community was and how they took charge of their own community and their own destiny even, and how they decided that they would fight for what their future would look like. How does that resonate with you and this work and even your experience as in your upbringing? Because I know you share some similar stories of being unprotected as well.
Right. So for me, what Ms. Danna was talking about is the heart of so many communities. Like I got into this work, I was so unaware of the things that were going on. And it wasn't until like coming into the forest, which is a community portion of Dogwood Alliance. It wasn't until coming into that actual portion and listening and understanding, because South Carolina is like in its own silo, and what goes on here is what goes on here. And a lot of the things are not amplified in South Carolina. I was even Googling this morning to see if there was a South Carolina Environmental Justice Network and seeing if there were things that we could do here on behalf of our communities. And what brought me to the table and organizing around the issues is being aware of what was going on. On my end, in the beginning, coming to the Forest Summits, I was actually a career coach, and I was filling these jobs at logging industries, them doing the wood pellets, things of that nature. I was on the other side, making sure that they had the people in place to fulfill the jobs that they needed to do this. So it wasn't until, I began to be aware of what was going on and people was actually telling me, and I'm like, on my end as a career coach, I'm like, yes, we're getting people jobs. Yes, we're doing this. Yes, we're doing that. And that was the big thing that was going on here, because South Carolina right now is pushing about 33% manufacturing. And over the years, like the last 5 years or so, it's been like Mercedes-Benz, Volvo, Boeing, BMW. Here in Greenwood, there's a place called Tejan, Colombo Energy, which is in Viva. All of those places came in, and it's like, yes, we're fulfilling these places, getting these jobs to these individuals to rebuild the economy in our communities. What I didn't know was these were the extractive things that were being talked about at the table. And it was like, you know what? This is affecting my community. So I didn't know anything about the air pollutants. I didn't know about, people having respiratory issues. I didn't know about those things. All I knew was that I needed to get people jobs, get them out of the WIOA system, and get them into employment. And so for me, it was, okay, I got to do this. And once I stopped and once I seen it, it's like, well, wait, hold up. We can't do this because this is the haves versus the have-nots. And so in that space, I was like, well, you know what? We don't know what's going on in our community. We don't know that these things are harmful to us, harmful to our children. And so I had to stop, think about what was going on, think about how it was affecting my community, and understanding that these places, number one, are strategically placed in low-income and impoverished communities, which are predominantly Black. Two, whether this person who's the project manager for this building, whether they're here or not, this stands in a community where people are unaware of what's going on, are unaware of what's being given to them. And we need to know the harmful things that are happening to our communities, to our children, to the longevity of our future. And so I had to hop on the other side, and I feel like, I'm working double time because people are unaware of what's going on. They don't know. And so coming to Dogwood, my immediate supervisor, Emily, she was like, hey, do you want to organize in your community? Of course, I've been an organizer nationally, locally, state. Of course, I want to do it, especially because this is meaningful work and this is working on behalf of people, my people, Black people. And so given that platform to be able to go out into these communities and talk about the real issues that are at hand, the real things that are going on, it was just like, yes. When I checked off a list and, I want to help people. That's my number one thing. And so I was given the opportunity here at Dogwood to work with Ms. Danna and to work with the team at Dogwood to amplify, number one, raise awareness around the issues, amplify the voices of the community, and create calls of action on behalf of these communities who are affected by industrial logging. So that's why I'm here, and I'm loving every bit of it. All right.
Well, we're glad you hopped over.
I love it. I love it.
Jump on over, Red Rover, send Erniko right over.
I love it. No, listen, the reason I wanted to hear your experience and wanted the people to hear your experience is because I think your experience connects with a lot of us who at one point did not know what was actually taking place. What, you know, we were operating because we've been taught to operate within a system of extraction. So we don't see extraction as being something that's normal. It's been normalized. And so when these things are occurring and we are leaving people unprotected, we're leaving whole communities unprotected, whether it be through the extractive deforestation that comes from biomass, or whether it be from the extractive relationship of providing subsidies or taking away subsidies that should be provided to upkeep that community. Either way it goes, we've operated so long in these extractive relationships that we've normalized this. And the abnormal thing is to call attention to it and say that it's wrong. That's what has become the abnormal thing. But I thank you all for being abnormal, because I'm in good company.
Yeah, well, I think what you're describing, Michael, is, you know, we're in a moral crisis because, you know, we can talk about the ecological crisis that we're in with climate change and biodiversity loss, or two, you know, like ecological crises that are both simultaneously happening, both of which are headed towards, you know, the extinction of humans and the rapid, the destruction of life on Earth as we know it. And if we're honest, we're in a system right now that is specifically designed to lift up and support a certain group of people, most of whom are white and male, not all, but most of whom are white and male. And the way that they're able to control the resources and the power is through controlling the resources and extracting it and extracting the value out of the resources.
Absolutely.
And it's a moral issue because, you know, this is just morally not right what's happening, that some people are lining their personal pockets at the expense of the lives of other people who they've deemed not to matter, and at the expense of life as we know it on this planet Earth. So including the trees, the birds, the insects, the turtles, the snakes, the bears. And so this is a moral crisis that we're in, and we need to call it what it is. And they have normalized immorality.
So who benefits? I mean, looking at it, who benefits? When you look at it, we've already shown that the community doesn't benefit. Now we're saying that the planet doesn't benefit, nature doesn't benefit. Who benefits from these extractive relationships? Who benefits from biomass?
Well, I think if you're talking about who benefits from a dollar standpoint, right?
I mean, benefit, period. Whether it be from a dollar standpoint, whether it be from just where's the benefit in doing this?
Right. Well, the only benefit is a dollar benefit that accrues to certain people. And that benefit flows mostly to landowners. There's a long history of, discriminatory policies and practices beginning from the early days of, colonization, where land was stolen essentially from Native Americans and then stolen again from African Americans when the government said 40 acres and a mule, and it never happened. And even the land that was owned by Black Americans over time has been whittled down to almost nothing, to the point that now Native Americans own 2% of land across America. Blacks own less than 1% of land across the rural South. So 99% of the benefits that private landowners get from clearing their forests and selling it off to the wood pellet industry goes to white landowners, right? So there's a long history of racist exploitation and, economic inequity. It also goes to corporate executives, who don't live in these communities, who don't really have a stake in the community. So you're talking about corporate executives that make, millions, some tens of millions of dollars a year in annual salaries, and top shareholders of these corporations. And that's essentially the group that benefits. And that tends to be demographically more white and more wealthy.
But watch this, Danna. When natural disasters happen, such as flooding, because of the lack of forest, it doesn't discriminate on who it attacks, who it assaults.
This is true. And so you're talking about, there are lots of costs associated with this that everybody suffers from, but disproportionately, those costs hit people who are low income and communities of color the hardest. Because when those floods come, people who have the means can go, stay in a hotel for a week. They have the resources to be able to go somewhere else and stay and, drive a distance. For people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who haven't paid their flood insurance on their home because they're taking care of an elderly parent who doesn't have health insurance, right? All of these things combined sort of create disproportionate impacts when something like flooding happens. So for even wealthy people who feel the impacts of the flooding, they don't feel it in the same way, in the same profound way that people who are living on the edge of economic stability feel it. And so it is disproportionately impacting, even though it impacts us all, right? And to your point, where is this going? Because these people, they got to have kids. They've got to have other people in their sphere that they care about. And it can't just be always about putting more money in your own pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Erniko, you look like you got some thoughts back there. I'm looking at you. You're up in there. Break them on out.
No, I totally agree with everything that Ms. Danna said. Looking at these communities and being a part of these communities as the regional partnership engagement manager at Dogwood, I had the privilege this week of going out to Mississippi. And in Mississippi, people just got water in certain communities. People were just able to drink the water in their communities. And these communities were predominantly Black communities. And the access, the equity, the opportunities that we lack in these communities, this impacted a lot of people across the Southeast. But the people who are heavily impacted are the ones who don't have that access, that equity, or that opportunity. And I was privileged to see people pulling up, getting cases of water. And they were thankful, they were grateful. This one lady, she just thanked me and was praying because she was able to have drinkable water. These are things that individuals can go to the grocery store and get. People who have access, predominantly white communities with access, their water was on, popping already. People are still dealing with the things that are going on as effects from what happened in one storm. Mm-hmm. One severe weather storm did all of this damage, and this was back in February. Here we are in April. And people are still, dealing with a water issue. People still have these things going on. And that's a testament to what Ms. Danna said about the failure of the government. These things that happen don't skip over anybody. It doesn't say because you're Black, I'm going to skip over you and I'm going to head to the white person. It doesn't do that. It tears down everybody when it comes. Mm-hmm. And when it tears down everybody, it's sad that the predominantly Black communities who don't have access or who don't have equity and opportunity aren't able to get the resources that they need in their communities. And that's where we see government falling short. And it's like this further distance between the have and the have-nots. And it's to your point, Ms. Danna, it is exactly what you said, a moral issue. And the individuals that are pocketing money, getting money, having money, don't see these effects the same way that predominantly Black, low-income, and impoverished communities see it. And that's something that needs to be amplified globally. Because these people are hurting. And every time they go through something, it further tears them down. It further does something to them. And all of these things that are going on, like, it's an entire system that continues to essentially penetrate over and over again. And it's like getting into this work, that's what draws so many of us, because it's so purposeful. Like, people don't see that we need to see these things. We need to amplify these things. Like, there needs to be, when we talk about a just transition, there needs to be a just transition in this work that we're doing. And we need to look at these communities, because this work is purposeful in reference to people. This is social work. And in the midst of it being social work, we need to understand that before we can get to the science of what climate is, we need to get to the heart and to the people that deal with the climate issues.
That's right.
So yes, I have a lot of thoughts on but it's
can I just say amen, Erniko?
Amen too. Amen. You got the amen corner over here.
Let's get it.
You got
but
the
these are
amen
real
corner
people,
over here.
real issues, real communities, and we need to take a real look and give real thought to what's going on in the reality of climate justice as it relates to social justice, racial justice. All of these things are at the heart of who we are. And if we look at it morally, it's just a moment to be empathetic and say, what if this were me? What if this were my family? What if these were my friends affected? What would it do?
But so, I mean, even in the fact that we don't really use, there's not a big market. I won't even say there's not a big market. There's not a real market for biomass or wood pellets here in the States. So, you know, it's like I just, in the supply chain of wood pellets, we aren't benefiting. Why? Why are we doing it? Why are we so incessant in doing stuff that's going to destroy us? I mean, we kill ourselves with our eyes wide open.
Yeah, and I think, the we is a really important, and yeah, we're all sort of tapped into this system, but there are folks making decisions every day that impact communities on the ground in places that they don't live, that are impacting people they don't know. And, that goes back to the morality issue and how decisions ought to be made. But what's happening right now is Europe decided, that it was going to get off of coal. Which we all know we need to get off of coal if we're gonna, avoid climate chaos to the point of like nothing being able to live on the planet, right? Humans not being able to survive on the planet and becoming an extinct species.
Right.
We got to get off coal and fossil fuels, but we also have to protect nature. And this is really becoming more and more clear every day, just how much we are connected to nature and how clean water, clean air, a healthy climate at a local level, even being able to withstand some of these climate shocks is dependent upon our ability to have nature to help provide a buffer for us. But so Europe decided that, they were going to get off coal. It was like, oh, well, we've got these big power plants. They got to burn something. Otherwise, we big people who have all this billions of dollars tied up in this infrastructure, that is burning coal are going to lose a lot of money if we just shut these things down. We have to burn something so that we can get our money back from these big, huge things we built, and it costs so much money, right?
Right.
So why don't we just substitute, oh yeah, trees, it's renewable, trees grow back, and on the surface, what seemed like maybe a solution really didn't get thought out very well. And so Europe started pumping literally hundreds of millions of dollars into subsidizing big utility companies to start burning wood in place of coal, even though burning wood actually generates more carbon emissions than burning coal. Like, it's taking us backward, not forward on climate change. And they had very little thought about, well, where's this wood going to come from? And what is the impact on the land going to be? And so without any forethought about that, and without even thinking about what communities might be impacted or how communities might be impacted by this, they just went ahead and started doing it. And so that's when we started to see this rapid build out in the southeastern US of these wood pellet mills coming into environmental justice, largely environmental justice communities that are already overburdened with a lot of logging and a lot of pollution, including from things like paper mills. We're the world's largest paper producing region. So these communities are already, suffering impacts from other wood processing facilities. And the clear cutting is among the highest logging rates on the planet. In addition, these communities have things like, coal ash ponds and big hog farms and lots of other types of toxic industry on top of it. So it's making things worse, not better on the ground. It's making things worse, not better in the climate. And, but it's because these expert decision makers somewhere up in, government over in Europe decided this was a good idea, but they really didn't think about it. And there wasn't enough inclusion of people who were going to be impacted by this when the decisions were being made. So that's a fundamental flaw of the way that government is working right now, is very top down and not inclusive, and not really considering and hearing the voices of people who live in the places that are going to be impacted.
So I'm wondering, why hadn't they reversed courses? Reverse course. If you've said that it's not beneficial, you've even said that it's costly in the long term. Why, being that there is really hardly any market here for logging or for biomass and wood pellets or whatnot, why don't we reverse course and abandon ship on that?
You mean, why doesn't Europe? Or why doesn't Europe, but why doesn't America? Okay. So those are two separate and different questions. So in Europe, what their challenge is right now is that they have aggressive targets to reduce carbon emissions over in Europe. And the policy that they currently have has designated biomass as being carbon neutral, which means that, and it's not, but under their policy, because trees grow back, they don't count the carbon that's coming out of the smokestacks, which is ridiculous. There's a whole bunch of science around this. In order to meet their carbon emission reduction targets, the European government has told us that they need biomass in order to do that, which makes no sense because they're just not counting the emissions. They're not actually reducing any carbon emissions, right? So they're trying to meet these targets, and they've pumped millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of subsidies into this. So it's kind of like, they would have to really say, oh my gosh, we made a mistake. We've wasted all this money, right? And we're not going to hit our targets. They'd have to literally swallow that pill in order to stop this. And the other thing that I think that is at work in Europe is that, is again, as we were talking about earlier, these big utility companies, they have a lot of investment in the infrastructure of these power plants. And if they're not going to be able to burn wood and they can't burn coal, and we're saying no to gas, it leaves them financially high and dry. And again, that, it's the dollar over doing what's right. And it's the dollar for a few, because there are not that many people who are invested in this, right? It's a small group of people who are invested in this model of, power plants. And, but the government is protecting and centering their interest, their financial interest, at the expense of the planet and people. And it happens all the time. So that's what has to be, that's what has to be fixed. And the same is true over here in the US South. Why is our government this to happen? It's what we were talking about before. It's landowners and the need for landowners to continue to be able to profit from logging their forest, and for companies here to make profit off of this green energy revolution. And whether it's truly green or not doesn't seem to really matter. It's really about whether or not Wall Street and landowners can continue to make money exploiting the forest. So that's what's at stake. But I will say, on the flip side of all of this, is the people power that's building right now is incredible. And we know that the only way to overcome this dynamic that we're in, that centers the interest of a few and pits the interest of a few against the rest of us, is a massive movement of people that is standing in solidarity and recognizing that all of these issues are interconnected and interrelated, and that we're fighting the same thing, which is the political power and the influence that corporations and wealthy people have on the politics in America and around the world. But there's more of us than there are of them. And our movement is growing, it's thriving, it's getting bigger every day. And the things like, putting together the Southern Communities for a Green New Deal is a beacon of hope, if you will, in a sea of, in a stormy sea.
Well, speaking of the Southern Communities Green New Deal, there are some solutions that we have on that platform concerning biomass. Mm-hmm. Could you just take a moment to talk about that?
Yeah, well, the first thing we need to do is just, stop pretending that biomass is green, clean energy. Like, it belongs nowhere in our renewable energy policies or in policies that are intended to, protect climate and generate clean energy. It's dirty, it's destructive, and we don't need it. We've got solar, we've got wind, we've got truly green, sources of carbon-free and pollution-free energy that we should be pumping all of our resources towards trying to expand. And we're just going backwards when we invest in biomass. So that's the first thing. It's like that just needs to be off the table. Like, right? No more subsidies. Can't be in renewable energy. Like, we shouldn't be building this out. So that's a big thing. The other is we've already got a lot of wood pellet mills in the South right now, right? So what do we do about that? We need to start phasing them down. We need to start closing them down, shutting them down, and rethinking, like, investing in our communities in a way that results in leaving more trees standing and, allows for more community-based ownership. It's proven around the world where communities have control over forests as opposed to private corporations or private individuals or even government, that they are more protected, they are less disturbed and healthier and more biologically diverse. And so we need to put more land in the hands of community ownership. The forest industry needs to be regulated. We need to account for the emissions that are coming from industrial logging, is another big tenet of the Southern Communities for a Green New Deal. Right now, the forest industry is getting a complete pass on massive amounts of carbon emissions that are occurring because of all the logging that's happening. And that needs to stop. They need to be held accountable, and we need to regulate so that they're not able to clear cut along the rivers in wetland forests of the coastal plain at a time which are critical for natural flood control, at a time when our communities are experiencing so much devastation as it relates to flooding. We need to shore up communities' natural flood control and really invest in the protection of nature and stop subsidizing and encouraging the destruction of our forests.
Ms. Danna, I definitely appreciate that and appreciate you bringing that to light, which brings me to, you know, you seeing these things over the years and how they have basically depleted communities and how they have destroyed communities, people in communities. What are some solutions you feel, solutions or strategies you feel would be of benefit to these communities that are hit hard by these issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we talked about a few of those. You know, one of the things we see in the process is, you know, just a complete lack of, you know, it's like the permit is just there to essentially permit pollution, right? So our current permitting system is not working. And we need a permitting system that actually does take into consideration, you know, whether or not a community wants or doesn't want a particular facility to come into their community. So we need to revise our permitting process to take into consideration, for example, disproportionate impacts on low income and communities of color, and to take into consideration cumulative impacts, that it's not just this one smokestack, but it's all the smokestacks in the community. It's not just this one clear cut, this one facility that might do a lot of clear cutting. It's like, what other facilities are around in these areas that are also doing a lot of clear cutting, and what's the cumulative impact of that? So that's one thing. The other thing is simple. It's just like, you know, measure and report the carbon emissions that come from industrial logging, and set targets to reduce those, right? And then the third is like real investment in communities in ways that put more land in the hands of communities and give them sovereignty and ownership over the way that the land is managed. And regulate and make sure that, you know, logging practices are not going to continue to perpetuate the tearing apart of natural safety net for communities, like clear cutting along the rivers, for example. And then the thing that I always like to lift up too is kind of a juxtaposition, you know, like in the energy sector, it's like, okay, if we're not going to do solar, we're not going to do coal and gas, we're going to do solar and wind, and it can create jobs, right? And potentially create more jobs than, you know, we would have with the coal industry, and cleaner jobs. And I think the same thing is true in the forestry sector with outdoor recreation. It creates, you know, 5 times more jobs than the forest industry does. It generates $119 billion more into the Southern economy than the forest industry does. And the industry itself actually pays way more taxes. So, and outdoor recreation helps to promote healthy communities, right? So you can tie economic development strategies to protecting more forests through developing local economies that are based on outdoor recreation. And that creates a very different model. And I think this is why, you know, this isn't something right now that the federal government is pushing on, because it doesn't work for Wall Street. It works for communities. An outdoor recreation economy tends to be more locally based. It tends to be more, you know, based on smaller, locally owned businesses, and not big companies coming in and setting up, you know, big operations. It's non-extractive. It doesn't work for Wall Street, but it works for communities. And so outdoor recreation is just one example of the kind of economy that can be created and can coexist with equity, creating greater equity, creating more jobs for more people, diversifying the economy, and making it a more sustainable local economy.
But then, listen, I thank you. I thank you for being with us. I thank you for being with us as well, Erniko, as our co-host for this season. We are looking forward to continuing these conversations on biomass for this entire season with Let's Talk with Rev. We've got Miss Kathy Eglin, who we'll be speaking with. I affectionately call her Mama Kathy. She's another one of my pioneers in the movement. Thank you all for being a mentor to me. Thank you for being a mentor to me. And I greatly appreciate you. Before we get out of here, one last question. If you could see it the way that you wanted, if you could snap your finger and the world would be the way that you want it to be, how do you see that? What do you see that being?
Well, I see clean air, I see clean water, I see communities of people of all zip codes, backgrounds, ages, I don't want to races, ethnicities, living together and supporting each other. I see a world where everybody has good, fresh food to eat, and fresh water to drink, and that's a given. I see a world where everybody gets the health care that they need, and that's a given. And I see a world where everybody can be in good relations with the natural world, have access to unspoiled nature, to be able to wonder in the beauty of a butterfly's wings at sunset. That's what I see.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Erniko, I think I want to ask you the same question.
Oh man. I was so enthralled in what Miss Danna said. For me, a world where everybody has opportunity, access, equity, and the opportunity to breathe easier because the world is greener. That's it.
I envision a world where everybody has the opportunity and the desire to dance and dance unashamedly with joy. Every child could go to sleep with their bellies fed with healthy foods. Everybody knew their place in the ecological system. And we honored each other as individuals and as a collective whole. I simply envision a world where we love our neighbors. And that's what I fight for. Listen, today, as always, we offer to you love, peace, and light.